The sun rose slow that morning, a pale coin melting in a sky the color of dust and ash. The kind of dawn that doesn't promise mercy, only another day of survival. The wind dragged the smell of smoke across the plains, and even the crows flew low, waiting for the world to tell them which side of death it stood on. Sheriff Elias Turner rode through that silence with the patience of an old wound. His horse, Boone, carried him steady, hooves whispering against the cracked earth. He had chased outlaws for half his life and found more ghosts than men. Dust Creek called him lawman, but what he really kept were graves, some marked, most not. The trail he followed this time wound west through a field of sun-bleached bones. A wagon train had been ambushed 2 nights ago, traitors, maybe a family among them. The smoke still lingered in the distance, curling like sorrow over the horizon that he reached the wreckage by mid-morning. The air was still thick with the smell of burnt oak and spilled life. Wheels split open like ribs, horses half buried in sand, and the wind singing through the broken spokes. He dismounted slow, hat pulled low, revolver drawn, not from fear, but from habit. Then he heard it, a sound softer than the breeze. A trembling breath, a small, dry sob. Beneath a torn buffalo hide near the wagon's remains, he found her, a Comanche child, no more than 6 years old. Her skin dusted gray with ash, hair tangled, eyes wide and lost. She clutched a doll made from cloth and bark, its face burned away. Elias froze. Not because he hadn't seen death, but because this was life, and he didn't know what to do with it. The land had rules. The men he worked for had rules. A white sheriff didn't bring an Indian child into town, not in a place like Dust Creek. Not in 1878. The world didn't forgive such things. He knelt beside her anyway. The girl flinched when he reached out, her small body tightening like a bird before flight. But her eyes, deep and ancient, older than fear, found his, and something wordless passed between them. He took off his coat and wrapped her in it. She was light as breath. Her hand gripped the edge of the fabric, and she whispered a word that sounded like "tsa." He didn't understand it, and he lifted her onto his horse and turned back toward Dust Creek. The wind howled against him, carrying voices from far away, voices that sounded like they wanted to pull her back. The ride was long and quiet. Once, she looked over her shoulder, as if she could still see her people somewhere beyond the dunes. Elias looked too, but there was only the endless horizon, the kind that swallows promises hold up by the time they reached town. The sun had already sunk low, bleeding red through the cottonwoods. Dust Creek was a small settlement. One saloon, one church, one street that led everywhere and nowhere. The townsfolk watched him ride in, eyes squinting from porches, whispers rising like flies. He ignored them all to the edge of town. His cabin waited, a small, lonely shape beside the river, built from the bones of trees long dead. Inside, the light from the fireplace flickered across worn floorboards and an old rocking chair that never rocked. He set the girl near the fire and poured her a cup of milk, the only comfort he knew to give. She didn't drink, just stared into the flames as if waiting for them to speak. He tried words, soft, careful ones, but they fell between them like stones. After a while, she reached into the ashes near the hearth and drew a symbol with her finger, a circle, and inside it, a smaller one. Then she whispered again, that same word, "tsa." Later, he would learn it meant brother. That night, Elias sat awake by the fire. He thought of the burned wagons, the bones, the smoke that still rose somewhere out there. He thought of the law, and how sometimes mercy didn't fit inside it. Outside, coyotes sang their hollow prayer to the moon. Inside, the sheriff listened, his hand resting near his gun but his heart restless near the child. He didn't know it yet, but in saving her, he had crossed a line the desert never let men cross without a price. As dawn crept over the plains again, turning the sand into silver, the child finally slept. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the wind outside, and for the first time in years, the sheriff felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't peace. Not yet, but it was close enough to hope that he couldn't bring himself to move. That he sat there, staring into the fire, until the first light touched her face. And he realized the desert never forgets an act of mercy. It remembers that it always remembers. The morning came heavy, draped in the gray stillness that follows a storm no one speaks of. Dust Creek woke slow, boots shuffling over creaky boards, doors opening to another day that felt like yesterday, and the one before that. Sheriff Elias Turner stepped out of his cabin with the child still asleep inside. The world felt watchful. Even the river nearby seemed to hush its murmur, as if it knew that peace had become a fragile, borrowed thing. He fed his horse, checked his rifle, then looked at the small coat bundled near the fire, the child stirring beneath it. She blinked awake, cautious but no longer afraid. Her eyes followed the smoke that rose from the chimney and disappeared into the cold sky. Lona, he whispered, testing the name that had come to him in the night. He didn't know her true name, so he gave her one that meant moonlight in a language he'd once heard from a drifter. It felt right. She looked at him, silent, but her gaze softened. In Dust Creek, silence was a rumor that traveled faster than truth. By noon, every porch in town had a whisper sitting on it. The sheriff's hiding a Comanche girl like T. the saloon. Martha Callahan, widow of the mayor and keeper of the town's gossip, stirred her coffee slow and spoke even slower. "He's a good man," she said to the preacher. "But good men lose their way when they forget which side of the river they're standing on." By sunset, the preacher had already sent a telegram to Fort Bascom that by nightfall, the soldiers knew. Inside his cabin, Elias lit a lamp and sat across from Lona. She was humming, low, soft, almost like she was speaking to the flames. The tune was not of this world. It carried the ache of faraway drums, of mothers calling children home. He tried to ask where she came from, what her people were called. But she only pressed her palm to her chest and said Naminu, Comanche. Elias closed his eyes. He had fought them once, long ago, when orders were simple and hearts were quieter. He remembered the smell of gunpowder and fear, the way men called victory what was really sorrow. Now, that same sorrow sat at his table, wearing his coat, drinking from his cup. Later, a knock came at the door. Deputy Hank Dillard, young, eager, full of the kind of certainty only youth can afford, he stepped inside without waiting to be invited. "Sheriff, the town's restless," he said. "They're saying you brought her here yourself." Elias looked at him, long enough for the silence to start biting. "She's a child, Hank. Nothing more." "Maybe not to them soldiers," Hank muttered, "or to the folks that lost kin to the raids. You keep her here, you'll lose your badge, maybe worse." Elias didn't answer. He just stared at the badge on his vest, that small, silver star dulled by years of weather and regret. For the first time, it felt like it belonged to someone else. Hank left with a shake of his head and a warning that sounded more like a plea. That night, Elias sat by the window with his rifle across his knees. The child slept again, wrapped in the same coat that had carried her from the fire. The wind outside hissed against the walls like an old ghost trying to be heard. Sometime past midnight, Boone whinnied. Hoofbeats in the distance. A rider, swift and sure. Elias stepped outside, rifle ready, the cold biting through his shirt. That a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall, lean, wearing a deerskin coat marked with red paint. His face was calm but carried grief like a second skin. "I come for the child," he said quietly, voice steady as stone. Elias lowered the rifle a little but did not move aside. "You her kin?" The man nodded. "Her name is Latu. She is daughter of the buffalo singer. We thought her gone to the spirit road." The sheriff's throat tightened. "She's alive, but she can't go back. Soldiers'll be here any day." The man's gaze didn't waver. "You saved her life. You carry her spirit now. In our law, that makes you TSA new blood brother." Elias didn't understand the full weight of the words, but he felt them settle deep. A strange kind of gravity. The man placed his hand over the sheriff's chest. "Two fires burn in you now," he said. "One white, one red. You must choose which to feed." Before dawn, the scout was gone, vanished into the hills like a dream that leaves warmth behind. When the sun rose, Elias saddled his horse. He had no plan, only instinct, to ride east, toward the fort, to plead for reason. But reason had long left this land. That he met the soldiers halfway. Their captain, a stiff man with eyes like cold iron, raised a hand. "Sheriff Turner," he called out, "you're harboring an Indian captive. Hand her over." Elias said nothing. His hand rested on the rifle at his saddle, not in threat, but in warning. "She's a child," he finally said. "Not a captive. She's property," the captain replied. "Belongs to the U.S. government now. Something in those words broke. Maybe in Elias, maybe in the sky itself. The wind turned sharp, carrying the sound of far-off thunder. He looked at the men behind the captain, saw how none of them could meet his eyes. Soldiers, just like him once, obeying orders that never touched their hearts. He took a slow breath. If you want her, you'll have to take her. For a long moment, no one moved. The standoff stretched between them like a held breath. Then the captain spat in the dust, turned his horse, and rode away. The sheriff knew then what he'd just done. He'd traded his badge for something heavier, something that might never leave him in peace. That night, Dust Creek glowed with lamplight and suspicion. From her small cot, Lona looked up at him and smiled faintly, as if she somehow understood the weight he'd chosen to carry. Outside, coyotes sang again, softer this time, almost like they were keeping watch. Elias sat by the window till morning, the badge lying cold on the table beside him. The desert outside whispered, as deserts do, that laws may build walls, but mercy builds bridges, and bridges, out here, rarely last long. The nights grew longer after that, the kind of nights where even the stars seemed afraid to shine too bright, as if light itself might draw trouble. Elias Turner no longer wore his badge. It sat on the cabin table like a piece of someone else's life, catching faint firelight as though it still believed in duty. The town didn't speak to him much now. When they did, it was in whispers, careful and polite, the kind of politeness that comes with fear. He'd made his choice. The whole of Dust Creek knew it. Each morning he'd take Lona, or Lutu, as she now told him to call her, down by the river. She would skip stones, hum songs that floated on the wind like lost feathers. She smiled more now, though her laughter still carried an ache, as if part of her soul still listened for distant drums that might call her home. Elias would watch, wordless. He'd grown used to her quiet, to her small hand finding his when the wind turned cold. In her eyes, he saw something he hadn't felt in years, forgiveness for things he didn't have the courage to name. But peace in the Wild West was a brief visitor. It never stayed long. One evening, while the horizon bled its last colors into the earth, a shadow appeared at the edge of the ridge, a rider, cloaked in dust. Elias reached for his rifle out of habit, but the man raised an open hand. Running Fox, he dismounted, his arm still bandaged from the wound Elias had seen weeks ago. His eyes burned with the kind of fire that came from grief mixed with duty. "The council knows what you did," he said softly. "They say the man who saves a child of the Comanche must be judged, not punished, not thanked, but named." Elias frowned. "Named?" Running Fox nodded. "In our way, a man who saves blood becomes blood. You must come before them. They will call you Tsenu, blood brother. You will belong to our fire as much as your own." The sheriff said nothing. He looked out toward the farm mesas, the sun setting behind them like a dying ember. Somewhere in his chest, a voice whispered that the world was asking too much of him. But another voice, quieter, deeper, told him that this was what mercy demanded. So he left at dawn with Running Fox and Ludu. The girl rode her own small pony, proud and serious, her hair braided with the sheriff's old handkerchief. The trail wound through canyons carved by time and sorrow, red walls rising like cathedral pillars, the wind humming old hymns through the stone. They rode 2 days before they reached the camp. Smoke curled up from the center like a prayer. The Comanche greeted them not with weapons, but silence, a stillness that felt older than Ward. At the heart of the camp sat Chief White Sparrow, his face a map of years and battles, his eyes sharp enough to pierce lies before they formed. When Elias stepped forward, the crowd stirred, murmurs rippling through the air like distant thunder. The chief raised his hand. "Why did you save the child of your enemy?" Elias thought for a long time before answering. "Because no child should die for the sins of men." The chief nodded slowly. "Then you understand what most men never will." They brought out paint made of clay and ash. One by one, the elders marked Elias's hands and chest with red, symbols that told stories he couldn't read but somehow felt. Luta stood beside him, her small hand in his. When the fire rose high, the chief spoke words that trembled through the night air. "From this day, you are Tsenu. Your heart beats in 2 lodges, ours and theirs. But know this, 2 fires burn brighter than one, yet they also burn faster." The tribe sang then, low, rhythmic, ancient. The song carried through the canyon. rising up to the stars that had been waiting to listen. Elias felt something loosen inside him, something he'd carried since the war, since all those years of law and blood and regret. He knelt, not as sheriff, not as savior, but as a man learning how to belong again. And then, thunder. Not from the sky, from hooves, soldiers. Their torches flared at the edge of the canyon, their voices cutting through the song like knives. By order of the United States Cavalry, someone shouted, "Surrender the prisoner and the child." The singing stopped. The desert went silent. Running Fox pushed Lutu behind a wagon. Elias reached for his revolver. But before he could move, the soldiers opened fire. The night burst open in chaos. Gunfire sparking against rock, horses screaming, flames leaping higher. Women pulled children into the shadows. Men shouted in both languages. Running Fox fell beside Elias, a bullet grazing his shoulder. He gritted his teeth, blood running down his arm. "They came for her," he gasped. "And for you." Elias fired back, not to kill, but to shield. Each shot echoed like a heartbeat refusing to give up. Chief White Sparrow stood tall in the firelight, chanting words that rose above the bullets. It wasn't a battle cry, it was prayer. A plea for the land itself to remember mercy. The soldiers hesitated. Maybe it was the sound of that chant, or the sight of the sheriff standing shoulder to shoulder with the people he was once told to hunt. Something in the world shifted. Then the captain, the same one from before, shouted to cease fire. The desert swallowed the echoes, leaving behind only smoke and trembling breath. When the dust settled, no one spoke. The captain looked at Elias, saw the red paint on his skin, the child clutching his coat. The tribe gathered not in rage but in solemn pride that he said nothing. He turned his horse, signaling his men to withdraw. And just like that, the night was still again. Elias sank to his knees, exhausted. Luda ran to him, arms around his neck. Running Fox pressed a hand to the sheriff's shoulder and said, "Now you have truly chosen." The desert saw it. It will not forget. The fire burned low. The stars leaned close. Somewhere between two worlds, a man who had been law found something older and greater, belonging. The dawn that followed smelled of smoke and rained out a soft, silver light crawled across the canyon walls, finding what the night had left behind: broken arrows, spent shells, and silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fall, it remains. Elias Turner sat beside the dying fire, his hands still marked with the red paint of the tribe, now streaked with ash. Luda slept with her head against his arm, her breathing steady, her small fingers clutching the edge of his coat, the same coat that had once marked him sheriff, and now marked him something far greater. Running Fox tended to the wounded. Chief White Sparrow prayed over the dead, not for revenge, but for peace, the rarest thing the West ever offered. Elias looked out toward the horizon, where the soldiers had disappeared hours earlier. He knew they'd return, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. The law was patient when it wanted to be cruel. He spoke softly to the chief. "If I stay, I'll bring more trouble. They'll come again." The old man nodded, his eyes deep as the riverbeds. "They will come whether you stay or go. But the desert remembers men who choose mercy. You gave her back her life. You gave us back a piece of hope we thought was gone." He looked toward Lutu, who stirred and smiled faintly in her sleep. "When she is grown," White Sparrow said, "she will tell her children that one man chose to listen to his heart instead of his orders. That story will outlive us all." Elias felt the truth of it settle inside him like a final bullet. Painful, but cleaned up by noon. He packed what little he owned. Running Fox rode with him to the edge of the canyon. Luda rode her pony beside them, her small form framed by the sun that shimmered through the dust. When they reached the open plain, she dismounted and hugged the sheriff's leg tight. Her eyes brimmed with tears she didn't want to let fall. That he knelt, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You stay with your people now," he whispered. "They'll teach you things I never could." She nodded but didn't let go. Then, softly, she said the word that had started it all. "Tsa. Brother." He smiled through the ache in his chest. "Always." Running Fox extended his hand. "Where will you go?" Elias looked out across the desert, a wide, golden loneliness that stretched beyond sight. "Where I'm needed," he said. The two men clasped hands, not as lawman and scout, but as equals, as brothers born of the same fire. And then the sheriff rode away. Days turned to weeks. Dust Creek changed slowly, like a wound learning to scar. Word of what happened spread in half-truths, stories told in saloons, whispered by travelers who spoke of a sheriff who turned outlaw to save a child, and of a Comanche who sang his name in gratitude. Some said he died out there in the wild, shot by soldiers. Others swore he became a ghost, guarding the border between worlds that refused to understand each other. But one evening, long after folks stopped looking, a rider appeared on the edge of town. His horse moved slow, tired but strong. The man's hat shadowed his eyes, but the people who dared look close saw something familiar, a steadiness that felt like home. Elias Turner dismounted before the church, where Martha Callahan was lighting the evening candles. She froze when she saw him. "Lord above," she whispered. "We thought you were gone." He smiled faintly. "I was. For a while." The town gathered as he walked down the street. No badge, no gun belt, just quiet purpose. He didn't come to reclaim his title. He came to make peace with the place that had once been afraid of mercy. He helped mend fences, rebuild the schoolhouse, teach the children of Dust Creek to read. White and Indian alike, he spoke little, but when he did, his words carried the weight of desert wind and the gentleness of rain. Even Deputy Hank came to him one night, hat in hand, eyes low. "I was wrong," he said. Elias only nodded. "We all were." 1 year later, under a sky thick with stars, the sheriff stood again by the river. The water moved slow, soft light rippling over its surface. Eye in his hands, he held the badge. Old, worn, its shine long faded. He turned it once, twice, then dropped it into the current. The metal caught the moonlight as it sank, vanishing into the dark. From behind him came a familiar sound, a child's song. He turned. There, on a ridge beyond the trees, he saw a small figure on horseback. Lutu, older now, her hair braided with white feathers. She raised her hand in greeting. The wind carried her voice, faint but clear. "Tsa." He raised his hand in return, and for a moment, the distance between them felt like nothing at all. The stars shimmered brighter, as if blessing the space between two lives that had once crossed by chance and forever changed their course. The river went on flowing, east to west, past town, past tribe, past every boundary men had ever drawn. It carried his badge, his sins, and his peace toward the endless horizon. And as the night settled over the plains, Elias Turner, sheriff no more, brother, forever, smiled for the first time in years. Because out here, in a land carved by fire and forgiveness, he'd finally found the truth. There are no strangers in mercy. Only roads that meet when the heart decides they should.